Hello. So this is a small talk I've done for the PHP user group in Berlin I attend, and these are some random profiling tips and tools for your LAMP stack. So imagine you have your application and it's been deployed for about a year. Everything's working perfectly, but your client calls you and says that it started running slow. So it got more users, it got more content, and there is something stopping it from performing like it used to. And now you have to find the bottleneck. So what you usually do, usually you go ahead and start with the database. And in our case, it's MySQL. So MySQL has this great thing called the slow query log, where you can tell it to log queries that execute longer than they should, than some set amount of time. So to turn it on, you set slow query log to 1, you set your slow query log file to some file, and then you set the long query time to the time in seconds that the query must take to be entered into this file. In this example, I set this to 1 second, but in reality that's far too much because ideally you want your pages to load faster than half a second, like 0.6 seconds is that sweet spot that you want to reach. So just in case, also log all queries that are not using indexes because indexes are very important for your performance. So this next line, log queries not using indexes also equals 1. And if you use replications, if you have like multiple slaves and a single master, you should also log slave statements. So after adding this to your configuration file and running like refreshing the page a few times, you should see it fill with entries like this. This is the slow query log. It's for example, in our case, I'm selecting like there's like a selection of a user from the database. There are some posts being selected. So we now have all this in a single file, but we have a slight problem of filtering it because as you can see, the query that selects the user is going to be here a multiple amount of times. So we have to reduce this to actually find the exact queries that are the problem. One way of doing this is logging to a table instead of a file. That's why we have the log output equals table option. But let's look at some parses that parse the slow log into something more usable. So uh, I've been using different tools, but MySQL dump slow does everything out of the box. Basically, you just give it your slow query log and it's gonna generate you a new file which is gonna have a query count and and patterns. So we see that in our case we had two patterns. One was selecting post and the other one was selecting a user by his name. So now we can take the queries from here and run them through explain and see what's actually causing some slowness. So narrowing it down, we try explaining the query and what we see, the important columns are possible keys and key uh, on the first screenshots. So possible keys are indexes that might have been used for this query, and as they are new, it means that the database has resolved to a full table scan where it goes through all the table without using indexes, and that's causing the slowness. So if the index was added, we would see it in both the possible keys and in the key column. So, but it's also possible to have too many indexes. Uh, if you are adding them um, all the time, they sometimes may overlap, especially if you have like compound indexes that span multiple columns. So, and you have to remember that too many indexes slows your writes down. So you you really want to have that optimum amount, not too many and not too little. So what do you do if we have too many indexes? How will we find the ones that we can safely delete? This is actually a huge, much harder than finding the ones to add. But thankfully, there is a persona toolkit for MySQL, which is a set of 32 tools for various things. One of those is PT index usage, which connects to your MySQL server reads through a query log and uses explain to ask MySQL about each query, and then when finished, it prints out the report on the indexes that the queries didn't use. So you can use this to find the queries, the indexes you don't need, and speed up your writes that way. But sometimes you want to debug a single request. You want to monitor it, we want to have a tool that's very similar to like when you backtrace in a code editor. So there is one like that. That's Profile SQL, which is like a proxy server between your application and the actual MySQL database. By running it as a proxy, it can give you the time lapse for each query. It can group queries into a session and monitor them in real time. So this way, if you're like actually digging deep, looking what the request is doing, this is actually going to help you a lot. Now let's talk about actually profiling PHP. So um, I'm going to assume that you know what XDebug is and you have at least tried using it. If not, there are many tutorials out there that talk about it. And for this talk, I just wanted to have some tips for things that not everyone might know, or something that isn't talked about that much. So I'm not gonna touch XDebug. That's for you know in depth here. What I'm gonna mention is an interesting technique of um, when you have graphs like these generated with XDebug, the cold grind traces. You sometimes want to have easy visual comparison, and that's why I suggest you use a ruler. You basically need a scale, and to achieve this, you can put somewhere in the code a useLeap function, which is just waits uh, a set number of microseconds. Tell it to wait like 0.001 second, and then because the size of that block is going to always remain constant, it's going to always show the constant time. Just by comparing it visually on different call grinds, you can understand which app is consuming more resources. So for example, in CakePHP, you can see that uSleep takes about 5% of the whole execution time. But like the Yi framework, it has a much bigger portion. That means that Yi framework has much less boilerplate than CakePHP. So this talk is not about frameworks, but the point is that just visually here, it's much easier for us to compare, and it also allows us some insight into places when XDebug is not really doing its job very well, because look at this Laravel call grind. You can see that the USLI block that I put just once has been drawn multiple times on the graph. So this is just a small hiccup on the XDebug part, which couldn't resolve the call tree directly. And if we didn't have this uslib here, it would be we wouldn't understand why there's so much confusion going on. But with that here, we can see that there is definitely some problem with how the call grind is being generated. So there are alternatives to XDebug. There is another tool done by Facebook, which is XHProf, which doesn't slow down execution time as much as XDebug does. Um, its profiling log file is about 10 times smaller. It can also do memory profiling without having to generate traces, and allows you to compare results from multiple runs. So it's all around has a lot more features to offer you. It doesn't do grinds in the cache grind format, so you won't be able to generate the nice K-cache grind images I just showed you before with XHProf. But you do get a browser UI, which looks like this on the screenshot. Um, so you pretty much like see the same amount of information you would see in K-cache grind, but just presented to you in a different way. So there is also now a third option, which is done by the people behind Symphony 2, Sensio Labs, which is Blackfire. This is not their actual logo. This is I just put here for fun because this was the first image I found when I googled Blackfire. So what Blackfire actually is a web tool that's going to be very similar to how XHProf runs, but a bit more complex. So it does pretty much the same thing, but works better in your browser, has nicer, say, your UI, and they also say that it's going to be usable to get more insight on your production servers. And the feature of comparing your traces and getting insight on them has been much more refined here, because you can see this is an example of it. In the left part, you can see like the comparison of two traces, and the red part and the yellow part is like the difference in the execution time of those functions in the call stack. So I don't know if this tool is going to be free or not. Um, you can definitely try it out now if you go to their website. Um, but if if it's like if it's going to be commercial and it's going to be a problem, you can always fall back to XHProf for to achieve pretty much similar results. One another interesting tip is that if you have XDebug installed, you can use it to colorize your var dump. It's a simple thing, doesn't really have to do anything with profiling, but just might be interesting for you. To just put in your PHP any xdebug like color equals 1 and you'll get some nice highlighting for your var dumps. Right, now let's talk about profiling your actual Linux server. So this has been a problem for some people for some time, because there are many things that can go wrong, like rogue cron processes, like a mail pool that has just been badly configured and just tries to send all the time or gets cluttered. There are problems with too many file descriptors being used, and it's really all hard to profile and debug. So what you can do now is use the perf tool, which is will record your research usage over time, and then you can see this report. So if you tell it to report for an extended amount of time, like say a few minutes, you can get a very deep insight into things that actually run on your server, and even if they execute in very small spikes, you will see them still on the results. So after you run a perf report, you get this nice UI where you can drill down and see like which process took which amount of like which percentage of cycles. And there are many like there's a lot of information you can get out of this. You just have to look in the manual for like some key bindings. um, but let's talk about some monitoring more. So here's where Munin comes in. Munin is a, a set of tools that is divided into nodes and like a processor. Nodes gather information about a specific system, and then the supervisor gets this information from those nodes and generates graphs. There are plugins that monitor virtually anything. For example, Drupal, Apache, PHP, Joomla. You can monitor even your Reddit karma. Seriously, there is a plugin that will draw your graph of your Reddit karma over time. It's distributed, so you can generate logs from all the different servers, and it helps you spot problems before they become critical. So here is an example. What we see here is some memory graphs, uh, processes, running processes. So if there are any spikes, you can, it'll be very easy for you to spot those. But I promise I'm talking about the web servers, and usually you don't profile them, you benchmark them. But like if you want to profile monitor them over time, Munin actually helps a lot here. So for example, for Nginx, you can monitor active connections, how much time is spent on reading, writing, and waiting. Like you can see that there was like a spike there that might be something you want to look into. So this is just another graph I put here for reference. And here are some graphs for Apache web server, Apache processes, Apache volume, number of requests per week, per month, per day. You can just configure that totally you like. And the best thing is that if you have multiple instances, Moodin makes it very easy to get graphs from all those on one single page. So if you can just in the morning glance at them and see that everything is running okay or not okay, and spot any problems. So this is, I hope you like this. As I said, it's just a very short intro into things you can do. So if you want to some more stuff like this, you can find me on Twitter, which is Draconigim, or my blog, Draconi.org. There's my GitHub profile and the framework that I'm developing, PHPXE. I actually post more on the PHPXE blog than I would do on my personal blog, so visit there if you want some information about like PHP and like recent news and stuff. So yeah, thanks everybody. Bye bye.